Welcome to the Mindfulness of Singing, and I'm Denise, your sassy, spunky scientist.
And I'm Tony, your bubbly, big-hearted flower child.
Our podcast features practical tips and tools for a journey of transformation using the healing power of your voice.
Each podcast, we will delve into the mind, body, and spirit connection by interviewing inspirational guests, sharing personal stories, and discussing the most recent scientific research.
Tune in and join our community of mindful singers. So today, Tony, normally we start with you telling me what our subject is. Good morning, by the way.
Good morning to you, Denise.
Got up a little earlier this morning than normal. Well, I got up at the same time, but I didn't get to do my ritual of meditation, some breath work, some coffee. I do all those things before I speak to Don. So this morning
That's probably good. Poor Don.
He's lucky that I know that mornings are not my thing. But anyway, I didn't get to do that today. And I'm not complaining because it was a privilege not to have to do it today, because as a culmination, as we promised in our breath month, we have the most amazing guest. Not that all our guests are not amazing, they are. But it's not very often that you get to interview a rock star. And
yes, indeed,
the author of The Oxygen Advantage, which Tony gave me this book, and it rocked my world. She left it at my house. Rocked my world. Patrick McKeown, Irish guy. That's not, don't think of that as an American word. It's a Scottish, Irish last name. And he is our guest today. And I'm so glad I ate my Wheaties, not really, the day that I decided I'm going to reach out to him and ask him to be on our podcast and tell him how these two really awesome ladies in opera and singing want to have him on their podcast. And I couldn't believe it when, like, 2 days later, he wrote back and said, yeah, I'd love to do it. I got a new book coming out. I'm like, really? Anyway, so Tony and I have been geeking out for a bit about it. We're super excited. And so if you don't know who he is and you haven't read his book, I'll tell you that he's helped thousands and thousands of people learn to sustain, like, sports performance, up their game in sports performance, and how to incorporate this simple but medically proven principles that and exercises into their lives to help them breathe better. And what he does is what I would call like high altitude training, which a lot of athletes got caught doping in that. You know, if you remember the Lance Armstrong story, that's what they were doing. They were mimicking that. But he actually, you don't have to go to the Rockies. You can stay home and get the same benefits of high altitude training if you do Patrick's breath work practices. And he is a certified Buteyko practitioner. That's how he began. And then he kind of branched off into his own, using those principles, but certainly into his own theories and practice of breath work and breathing. So it is really an amazing, amazing book. And this podcast, I have to say, you're gonna love it. There's so much good, amazing information from our guest. And he does have a pretty thick Irish brogue, so you'll have to listen carefully. His THs are t, so instead of earth, he says ert. So just so you know, and that you kind of get, you have to listen pretty closely. I listen to his meditations at night, sometimes his breath meditations. And there's something about that brogue that just like puts me into this relaxed. I love that Irish brogue. But I do have to really pay attention to some of the accent there for my American brain to go, oh, that's the word he's saying. So you'll want to listen to this carefully, and you'll want to watch it on YouTube if you can't quite pick it all up on by your ear alone, because you get more by watching someone's mouth move. So just for our Americans who are like, I don't understand what he's saying exactly, just watch it. You'll get it. It'll be good. So if you don't catch it all by the ear, watch the video. It'll help. So without further ado, we're going to bring on Patrick and enjoy. Good morning, Patrick. How are you? We're so happy to have you here today.
Yes, good morning. It's great to be here. Thanks very much, Denise and Tony.
Nice to see you.
So, as we talked about in the couple of emails that I've sent you, we are both professional singers, and this podcast is for singers. Well, anybody that wants to listen, but certainly our audience is singers of all kinds. They're classical singers, pop singers, country singers, whatever, any kind of singer. And I was given your book, let's see, by Tony, I think. Yeah, I started having to think about that. But yes, and it rocked my world as a voice teacher and as a singer myself. My Bolt score was shit. And I'm a pretty active person. Like I'm not, so I was stunned by it and started working on my Bolt score, and it changed so many things about my singing and about my life. So thank you for your book, Oxygen Advantage, because it changed a lot of things for me. And Tony's been in the breathwork space for a long time because she's a yogi as well as a singer, and so she was kind of catching me up to speed. So for me, it was like rocked my world, and it's rocked my students' world, probably to some of their chagrin, because I make them take a Bolt score a lot, and we do a lot of Oxygen Advantage things, and I try to get them to tape their mouths and stuff like that. And I know they think I'm crazy, but it's all good. So tell us, for our listeners, in case they don't know your book and in case they don't know about a Bolt score, what is a Bolt score? How did you go down this road? You came from a certain practice, I think, called Buteyko. Can you just kind of fill in the gap for us?
Sure, yes, because I was working mainly with people with asthma from 2002, and then with people with sleep apnea and snoring and insomnia, 2006, 7, and then children. And I often wondered why we weren't seeing healthy people coming in for breathing practice. And post-economic crash, a lot of people with anxiety. So I put out workshops on mindfulness and functional breathing patterns. So not just teaching people how to take their attention out of the mind onto their breath, but actually change their respiratory physiology to improve blood flow to the brain, to calm the central nervous system, to improve heart rate variability, and to achieve diaphragmatic breathing. But 90% of the people who attended were female. And then I was wondering, well, where are all the men? So I said, we have to set up some program, some technique that's going to be appealing to the male, because a lot of men are suffering from anxiety, racing mind, poor performance, poor focus. So that's where the Oxygen Advantage came about. And it's kind of weird because now it's going full circle. So Oxygen Advantage was traditionally very much a male-dominated technique. It was all about performance, pushing the body, and putting the body into oxygen deprivation and high carbon dioxide, disturbing blood gases by doing breath holding, specifically to improve performance in sports. And now there's with the Oxygen Advantage now, we have 300 instructors, and it's across 50 different countries. And now we've just opened it up to embrace both health and sports, but also moving away from Buteyko. I suppose it's like this. When any of us are taught in a particular breathing technique, we're typically taught according to tradition. And it's very difficult for people to wander outside of that, because then you're wondering, am I teaching the technique that I was taught, or what am I teaching? And Oxygen Advantage gave me the ability to explore any breathing technique and to bring it in. And it's funny, the new book has a section on music, because I worked with a small number of professional singers, and some of them were losing their voice during the winter. And to me, it kind of made common sense. I did a course for Northern Speech, and it was peer reviewed for ASHA, which is the North American Speech and Hearing Association. So SLP's speech and language pathologists had peer reviewed this course. This is going back a good few years. And when we were talking about that, we were thinking about the nose is the only organ which is protecting the upper airways. And the upper airways is where the vocal cords are housed. And the vocal cords consists of bands of smooth muscle, which is influenced by carbon dioxide. And if you've got poor breathing, number one is you run out of air. Number two is you're too breathy. Number three, poor breathing and upper chest breathing and faster breathing will increase anxiety and stage fright. And for example, all of that that's associated with it, poor sleep. And then I had a professional singer who composed some music for one film. It's called Gangs of New York, but that's just an example. But he was losing his voice every winter. Now, I assume that what he was doing was he was singing during the day and then he was drinking pints of Guinness that night. I assume that's what he was doing. And then he was going home.
You don't have to
it.
assume. That's
Yeah.
the truth.
I would say it is, just because sometimes it comes parts and parcel with he was in a band as well. And I thought then, I'm assuming now he goes home now and he's sleeping with his mouth wide open and he's breathing hard through an open mouth and he's snoring. And that's trauma to the upper airways. So he's exercising his upper airways during the day, but he's not giving them a chance to recover during sleep. And the mouth it absolutely does nothing in terms of breathing. It's really, if we breathe through an open mouth during sleep and if we wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, it's very traumatic on the upper airways. And when I think of the amount of people who have vocal cord issues and upper airways and increased production of mucus and losing their voice and increased susceptibility to respiratory disorders, even just sounding too nasally. And you see, my nose is all over the place, so I sound nasally. But you can still improve that based on changing breathing patterns. And everybody should have their mouth closed during sleep. At least give the upper airways a chance, and the mouth does nothing for breathing. So Denise, coming back to Bolt score, is a traditional measurement of the length of comfortable breath hold time. So the individual is sitting down, and it's a measure for adults. It's not really a measurement for children. We have other techniques for kids. And I asked the individual just to take a normal breath in and out through their nose and to pinch their nose and to time it in seconds. How long does it take until they feel the first definite desire to breathe? And when they resume breathing, their breathing should be fairly normal. Now, this has got some attention in recent years, especially with functional breathing and functional movement, and also, say, for example, in sleep apnea. And the cutoff point is 25 seconds. So one professor of physical therapy in the United States, Professor Kyle Kiesel, he looked at 51 subjects. Now, they were young people, like 27 years of age. And out of the 51, only 5 of them had normal breathing, which is bizarre. You're talking about 10%. Now, he looked at their breathing from a number of different perspectives, from a biochemical point of view, which is focused on carbon dioxide in the blood, from a biomechanical point of view, whether you're breathing low using the diaphragm, and also from a psychophysiological point of view using questionnaire called Nijmegen. So he found that most people had failed either one, and I think it was 20% failed all 3. But his conclusion was, if your comfortable breath hold time is above 25 seconds, there is an 89% chance that dysfunctional breathing is not present. Now, if we look then at what does it mean if you have a low breath hold time during rest? Well, if you have a low breath hold time, and say somebody's Bolt score is typically 15 seconds, they have a tendency to breathe a little bit faster. So they have a faster respiratory rate. They also will tend to breathe more upper chest, and they also will be more likely to feel air hunger. They will have greater difficulty sustaining a note because they need air. And for example, if somebody is, talking for a long period of time, there's a greater work involved in terms of breathing. So sustaining a note is one aspect of it. Trauma to the upper airways is another aspect. Low Bolt score, Typically it's something that we see with people with anxiety and panic. Do you know the anxiety and panic population? 75% of them have dysfunctional breathing patterns. 75%. So, and I often feel like, what's going on here? Because here you will have thousands of people with anxiety and panic, and they're going to their psychologist and they're going to their psychiatrist, and everybody is looking at this, that, and the other. And let's look at the basics here. Let's look at their breathing, because if they're breathing fast and shallow, as simple as that, and it's not as if they're having a panic attack, it just means that their breathing is a little bit faster, a little bit shallow, a little bit upper chest, maybe mouth breathing. They don't necessarily have a natural pause between breaths. They will have a low bolt score. That's going to affect their performance. And just before I forget, women's breathing is very much different to men's. And this has been documented since 1905. And, me as a man, and I suppose raised as a Catholic and a shy Irish man, of course, I wouldn't be talking about women's breathing and hormones and all that stuff, because, that's something we steered completely away from. But now that I'm growing up, nearly 50 years of age, it's about time, I started looking at it. And the deeper that I dug into women's breathing, how on earth did we miss this one? How on earth, in terms of women and performance and monthly cycle and postmenopause, and that has a huge impact on breathing. A lot of the symptoms in terms of fatigue, increased pain, panic, anxiety, poor sleep, this is impacted, especially with younger females during the monthly cycle, days 10 to days 22, post-ovulation, mid-luteal phase. They have a tendency towards a faster and harder respiratory rate, which can cause carbon dioxide in the blood to drop by up to 25%. Now, if we're
Wow.
measuring performance in females, we need to be taking it to the monthly cycle. And what's more, women with PMS, they need to be looking at their breathing, and they need to track their bolt score. So I included this chapter. So now we've gone beyond the oxygen advantage. The oxygen advantage is very much the alpha male coming in. The guy, like working with rugby guys, if I said to them, listen, I'm going to have you do breathing techniques, they're gone. They don't want to know. But, as I said to one coach with rugby, listen, I'm going to turn these guys blue, and then they'll take breathing seriously when they feel a bit of pain from it. And,
Right.
that's the way
Right.
it was. But now we're gone full circle, because I think we have to consider breathing. It's one of those functions, and it's probably the only function whereby we can influence the major disciplines of medicine. So it's something that we should be, and it's not just, I think there's an awful lot of misinformation out there about it. And I'll give you this example. I was going to a university in Dublin called Trinity College, and I was very anxious about, now I was a mouth breathing kid, a mouth breathing teenager, I had terrible sleep apnea undiagnosed, poor concentration, all of that. Nobody once ever told me to breathe through my nose. And society is demanding that we can concentrate on individuals. So it's demanded that we are able to concentrate. It's demanded that we are able to hold our attention on doing what we're doing. But nobody tells us how to concentrate. You need good sleep. You need good breathing patterns. You need to train the brain to be able to hold its attention and focus. And those are skills, and concentration is a skill that we need. And I was lucky I came across it. But coming back to breathing, I remember going to do this exam, and I was as anxious as anything, I didn't want to even go into the exam hall. So I went and I took a walk for about 3 or 4 minutes just before going in. And I took this few big breaths, because this was all that I was hearing about. Breathing, take this big breath, and you see people, big breaths, big breaths. I took 3 minutes, big breaths, and I walked into the exam hall, and I was totally spaced out. It was the wrong thing to do. We have to show, if your goal is to improve blood circulation, if your goal is to improve oxygen delivery, if your goal is to calm the mind and improve focus and concentration, let's look at the physiology.
Beautiful. It reminds me there's a yogic saying about, or maybe I may have read in your book too, that when the breath is right, you're not aware of it going in or out. It's just in this space. And
Yes, it's very true, Tony. It's really, really true. And if you look at, in terms of yoga, I think some information has crept into yoga that in terms of the benefits or so-called belief that it's beneficial to take big breaths. And there's a yoga instructor from Falls City in Seattle. Her name is Robin Rottenberg. And she's been teaching yoga for about 30 years. She's a yoga instructor trainer. And she developed chronic fatigue and I think sleep apnea. And she came across my own work and breathing light. And she started practicing it herself. And then she trained in Ireland going back a few years ago. And she wrote a book called Restoring Prana. But a long story short, she went back to the ancient sutras, what information she could get. What you said there is it kind of reflects on the saying with breathing that your breathing should be so smooth that the fine hairs within the nostrils do not move. And the word that she kept on finding with the yoga instructors and yoga masters was the word subtle. And it kind of reminds me of, is it true that opera singers as well, that they were training to sing, maybe classical singers, and they would have a candle flame about 6 inches or about 10 centimeters from their face? And they were supposed to be able to sing with such conservation of the breath that they didn't blow out the flame. And
Yes,
I
I
don't
had a
know, is
teacher
that
who taught
still
that.
practiced today? Is it still
No,
practiced today?
No,
And it would
no.
have, it
no.
would, you know what,
No.
Denise, it makes total sense.
I'm gonna try that. That sounds like fun. I haven't done that before. I haven't heard that nugget.
Yeah. So that's it was a way to test the theory or the word appoggio, which is Italian and it means to lean against. And so a classically trained singer is trained to take in all of the room airwise, just take it all in as much and as low and as deep as you can, and then to cause some resistance to the air by, well, a lot of teachers teach various things. Some teachers teach to push out sideways. Some teachers talk about pushing down towards the ground, pushing towards your feet, flexing the buttocks. Marilyn Horn is somebody that I studied with, and she would talk about being able to hold a quarter between the butt cheeks, that you would have so much intensity in the lower part of the body so that you would conserve air, and then to feel this pressure or leaning against in the chest area so that you had a very controlled, very small thread of air that came out at your will and at your control, which I'm all about, except the whole taking in the whole room. That I don't teach anymore.
This is interesting because you could, for example, take in a big breath. And if you have a good bolt score, you'll naturally have conservation of the breath. To give you an extreme, we receive emails now with individuals who are suffering with long COVID, and
Mhm.
their bolt score is 3 and 4 seconds. Now, you can
Mm,
imagine somebody with a bolt score of 3 or 4 seconds, they can't talk. They cannot
right.
string a sentence together because they don't have enough air because they're fighting for breath. So, if we thought of a really well trained singer with functional breathing patterns, with a bolt score above a minimum of 25 seconds, there will naturally be a conservation of the breath there. And bringing the bolt score with functional breathing in with singing, because I suppose, think of the anxiety population. They have a genetic predisposition because of their condition that it's feeding into their breathing pattern disorders. Think of the population then with hay fever and rhinitis, which is about 30% of the normal population. They will have a tendency to mouth breathe because of nasal obstruction, because you don't breathe through your nose if your nose feels stuffy. So you switch to mouth breathing. Mouth breathing is faster breathing, it activates the upper chest. Think of the group of people with asthma. So I'm sure that, your groups are going to be reflective of the normal Western population. 10%,
Mhm.
8 to 10% of the adult population have asthma. So if we were to look at different pockets of individuals who are training in voice, some will have better breathing than others. And
Oh
some
yeah.
of them, because of their genetics and their conditions, is holding them back. And I think these people really need to be shown. and showing the importance that if you have your mouth open when you go down the street, it's not good. And that's going to affect your singing. If you have your mouth open during sleep, as 50% of people with 50% of the adult population breathe through an open mouth during sleep, that's not good because it's going to be trauma to the upper airways. So I think the importance of it here is not just necessarily how we breathe while we're inside a studio or how we breathe while we are doing singing lessons, but it's how do we breathe outside of it. And one of the best things that I did 22 years ago is I read this about this in a newspaper article. That's how I came across it. And it was the work of a Russian doctor, Dr. Buteyko. And he said two things: breathe through your nose and breathe light. And I decongested my nose using a breath hold exercise. And then I switched to nose breathing. And I felt a lot of air hunger when I switched from mouth to nose breathing, because suppose you still have that habit of mouth breathing and the body has adapted to that physiologically. So we need to change that. But that night, I wore breathe right strips across my nose to get my nose open. And I taped up my mouth. And the first morning I woke up kind of getting used to it. The second morning I woke up after nasal breathing during sleep. And it was the best night that I had slept in about 15 years. That's no
Wow.
exaggeration. And now you're starting to see, you know, I think breathing now is really getting hot. I'm sure you've read James Nestor's book as well.
Oh,
I
yes.
believe it's
Yes.
number 5 in the United States. And it's
Hmm.
been tremendous what
And
he has
here's
done.
yours too.
And the oxygen advantage. Thanks very
Well,
much,
Oh,
Tony.
yes, yes. If you didn't see that one,
I
Esther's
watched
book is great, but this one
your
is great too.
yeah, absolutely. But I watched your podcast with him, the two of you. I watched your podcast when you had him on your show and spoke
That's
with
cool.
him on YouTube.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's a great guy. Spoke with him last night as well. Or was it the night before? Yeah, no, it's the night before. Like I think this is really the lift that we needed in terms of breathing. We've been talking about breathing and nasal breathing and all of this for almost 20 years. And it was a bit of a slog because it takes a while, when you're talking about something, and it made so much sense. And I suppose the thing that made the real difference to me was I was that mouth breathing child and teenager. I have the craniofacial abnormalities. I was falling asleep in class. I had no concentration. Now I was very driven, and I was studying 12 hours a day just to keep up with my grades. And I got my grades, but I will say now my concentration now is better than it was when I was 16. And it shouldn't be that way.
Hmm.
Can you think of all of the kids? And a lot of kids like are going to get frustrated and then they're labeled with ADHD. And let's just even look at that. This is not my ideas, like there was one study in Stratford upon Avon looking at 11,000 children over 8 years, and children with sleep disorder breathing, which includes snoring, if untreated by age 5, they have a 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8, because the
Wow.
brain is developing during the formative years. And if the child doesn't get good sleep, it's going to impact their cognitive development or academic ability for the rest of their life. And that will translate into every area of life.
Yeah. Right. I'm
Absolutely.
reading a I'm reading a book right now called Brain Maker, and it's an amazing book. I yeah, and a lot of that is the discussion, like why we have children who have asthma, ADD, things like that. And yeah, absolutely. Oh, I know. I had a question, or not a question, but a comment. One of the things that singers do is we don't breathe through our nose. We breathe through our mouths. And so that, even though you may be taking in a lot of air and you may be making the breath last a long time, you're still breathing through the mouth. And most singers, I don't know anybody that doesn't, I can't think of one singer that I know personally that doesn't suffer somewhat from some kind of anxiety, whether it's stage fright, you know, certainly anxiety about forgetting words, or anxiety about not being able to stay in the moment and be,
Mhm.
focused, while they're singing, they suffer from some kind of anxiety. And then we throw them out on the stage and say, okay, so now over the next hour, you're going to breathe primarily through your mouth and you're going to do it a lot. So good
Mm,
luck.
yeah,
And
yes,
for me, it just
yes,
doesn't really make any sense based on the science of it.
yes,
So I try to get my singers to take their first breath through the nose, and only if they have to breathe through the mouth, because it's quick or something like that, or you
yes,
don't have
yes,
a lot of
yes.
time to
Yeah,
breathe through the mouth. But otherwise, if you have 2 or 3 measures of nothing going on or a measure of nothing going on, breathe through your nose. Breathe through your nose.
yes,
And
yeah,
it's helped a lot of my young, you know, 20 something year old singers. It's helped them a lot. Uh, Not only to be better at being able to sustain their pitches, but also just their anxiety level
yeah.
for
You
sure.
know, in terms of talking, it is very difficult to continuously breathe through your nose in between sentences. Singing is going to be the same. You could do it, and it would sound a little bit like this. So you're talking away, but then you have to stop and pause to breathe in through your nose. And then you talk away, and then you have to stop and pause to breathe in through your nose. So nobody's going to listen. So I don't worry too much about little breaths and ver. The main thing that we do in terms of talking is we try not to hear our breathing because we're using sound as an indication. Now, you can imagine the typical hyperventilator, and every now and again we have one coming into us. And sometimes it's more often a female than a male, so this is not being biased. So she comes up the stairs anyway, and she's in a tizzy, and she's going, oh my God, my God, my God. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And that's all you're doing. And there's a huge big breath, and you're hearing these big breaths in between sentences, and you're saying, okay, you're in the right place. Now we're going to sit you down. We're going to show you how to slow down your breathing and breathe lightly and increase your control pause or bolt score. And, of course, agitation of the mind. When we think of one of the things that I noticed when I started reducing the volume of air that I breathed, and this is only for short periods of time. So say we focus on the biochemistry, and I'll have individuals breathing really, really slow. So really light breath of air in through their nose and a very relaxed and a slow and gentle breath out. And then when they breathe in again, almost breathing in imperceptibly, that there's hardly any air coming in through the nose, and then a really relaxed and a slow, gentle breath out. And during this exercise, people are breathing less air than what they need. They feel a little bit of an air hunger, but they notice that their hands are getting warmer. But it's not only the blood circulation in the hands get warmer, it's also the blood circulation in the brain. So number one, from a biochemical point of view, it's very important to be able to improve blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. From a biomechanical point of view, in terms of steadying the nerves, having individuals put their hands either side of their lower ribs, that as they breathe in and the diaphragm is moving downwards, you're getting lateral expansion, you're getting some movement to the front and some movement to the back, but you don't need to take a full big breath to do that. You can breathe deeply, but breathe light at the same time. And then in terms of improving resilience, and objectively a scientific measure of this would be heart rate variability. And therapists of old, their patient would come in and the patient would sit down and the therapist would locate the patient's pulse. And the therapist would monitor the patient's pulse, but at the same time observe the patient's breathing. And as the patient breathed in, the therapist is looking to see what's the change in the speed of the heart rate. So is there a change in the speed of the heart rate as the person breathes in and as they breathe out? And if you have a patient and if there's hardly any difference between the speed of the heartbeat and the breath in and the breath out, we know that person is stuck in sympathetic drive. So they have too much sympathetic tone and not enough parasympathetic tone. So a good measurement, really what we're trying to do is also achieve a balance in the autonomic nervous system and a balance between the fight and flight and the rest and digest. And heart rate variability is that clinical and objective measurement of vagal tone. And as we breathe in, the heart rate should be speeding up a little bit. And as we breathe out, the heart rate should be slowing down a little bit. And that gives us a good indicator of the balance there. So, there are ways as well in terms of, I talk publicly, and I don't like using PowerPoint presentations because I feel it's a big distraction. You have an audience in the group, maybe whatever, a few hundred people, and they're all looking up at this screen and they're hypnotized and they're not even listening to you. So I rather just go out there and talk off the cuff. And there are, of course, I suppose this is where a little bit of experience comes into. When you know your stuff, it's almost that you're going on autopilot. However, you'll always feel a bit anxious. And I have my own little ritual, and I'm sure people do have theirs. And like mine would be to, if I was talking at 2 o'clock, I wouldn't go near the conference room until 1 o'clock. I wouldn't go near there at 9 o'clock in the morning because you'd end up talking to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and you've got fatigue by the time you're due to talk. I'd hide away in a hotel room, stay away from everybody. And what I would do is, my own kind of ritual is, I close my eyes, I bring my attention inwards for at least a half an hour. And it's good from an energetic point of view, but it's very good with slow breathing and light breathing to bring a stillness to the mind, to really activate that parasympathetic response and to bring myself into present moment awareness. But then I'm too relaxed. So after I down regulate, I then up regulate. And to do that, what I do is I stand up, I breathe in through my nose, out through my nose, I hold my nose, and I walk a few paces holding my breath. And then I wait a minute and I do it again. And then I go into a light jog holding my breath, because it's the breath hold which increases blood flow to the brain. So in one way, I spend a half an hour really bringing the body into relaxation, settling the mind, present moment awareness, conserving my energy, not talking to anybody. And sometimes I've even done this. I've been in conference rooms, there's 500 chairs there, all the lighting, the technicians are all doing what they're doing. And I'd sit in the corner, close my eyes and focus inwards, because I want to conserve my energy and I want to bring it inwards. I don't want to surrender it to the mobile phone, because that's what many people are doing, surrendering all of their attention outwards. Let's bring the attention inwards and let's influence the autonomic nervous system. And yes, it's all about relaxing first of all, but then we want to stress the body a little bit. So I do the breath holds to stress the body, to open up the nose, to open up the airways, to activate the diaphragm. And then I go out and I just flood my body with energy, and I walk out with every cell of my body, not stuck in my head. And you know what? It's worked pretty well. So I've included that as pre-competition, then preparation for guys going into MMA fighting. And, it works for them as well. That because we want to have that flow state, that state of mind, whereby we're both in a feeling of relaxation, but also intense alertness. And that's when our attention is moving simultaneously with time. And that's when it's effortless. And we also have to bear in mind, all of the information and the practice over the years, it's all stored in there. All we have to do is get the critical mind out of the way. Once we get the critical mind out of the way, that intuition, that storage, that muscle memory, all of that information comes out when we need it.
Oh my.
Beautiful.
I cannot it's great. But I really struggle with monkey brain. Just it's hard for me. And I try meditation. I've listened to your sleep meditations at night, and they help me immensely. But if I'm left to my own device, like nothing guiding me or whatever, I can think of 9 million ideas.
She can. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, no,
I'm a
it's
witness
not
to that.
good. Everybody around me is like, stop it.
That's enough.
Yeah. But so I get that. I mean, I think my bolt score is a lot better than it used to be. I still struggle sometimes. I'd like to move it past 30, but I can't seem to. I did hike yesterday with a rucksack with about 16 pounds in it, and I hiked for 3 miles, and I really made sure that I had my mouth shut. And it was hard going up the hills. It's not easy. It's really difficult. but I really worked to do that. And I noticed when I got home, my heart rate variability was a lot better. Um, and I could get my Bolt score pretty high, but then in the mornings I wake up, I take my Bolt score, and sometimes it's not great. And I don't think I breathe through my mouth at night, and I do tape sometimes, but I'm wondering, maybe I am breathing through my mouth off and on, and maybe I need to just tape it every night.
I think typically people don't necessarily, if I look at a recent enough paper that was published in the Laryngoscope, looking at 95 individuals with established obstructive sleep apnea, only 11 of them continued to breathe through their mouth solely. And 36% of them were sole nasal breathers, and the rest of them were switching from mouth to nose breathing. So I think it would be true to say that we do tend to switch in the domain from mouth to nose breathing. And that's the one thing that the taping, it's helped a lot. Now, we brought out a tape for kids, and now it's become popular for adults because a lot of people, they would be uncomfortable with taping the lips. So we use a tape that surrounds the mouth to bring the lips together, but it's not covering the lips. And that in turn has made people less anxious about it, because it kind of sounds a little bit draconian. And, with children, we really had issues trying to get them to breathe through their noses, and both during wakefulness and sleep. And that's the group that we really want to try and work with as well, because of the craniofacial changes that can happen. If your Bolt score is 30 seconds, it's pretty good, and what I'd be doing is just working continuously, bringing some attention onto the breath. And it's so common. If we were to talk with the vast majority of people, and if you were to ask them, do they have control over the mind? Can they switch off thinking? They will say that they have great difficulty. And I think this is part of our education system, that we've been taught how to think. Our mind has been trained to be able to analyze and to reason and to decipher and to break information into tiny pieces. We've been trained how to think, but we haven't been trained how to stop thinking. And this is where the breath is really, something in terms of, because I think the breath is the easiest place to start. But then again, for somebody with anxiety of the mind or a racing mind, maybe just they got frustrated. I think that will be natural. You have your attention on the breath and bump, your mind has gone off again. You bring your attention back and your mind has gone off. So we use small little breath holds to increase blood flow to the brain to have a calming effect. And sometimes with people with anxiety and panic disorder, they can get anxious just following their attention on their breathing. So I have to give them different kind of strategies. How can I calm the mind or calm the central nervous system? And when brain cell excitability is, when it's reduced, the person then can focus easier on their breath. And the other thing, Denise, is sleep, because insomnia is relatively common. And if one has insomnia, you don't wake up feeling alert in the morning, and you're not going to focus. And for a child, it's related poor sleep to ADHD, etc. But for an adult, it's, how can you have a calmness of the mind unless you have good quality sleep? So
Right.
yeah, I think it's the perseverance of it. And I suppose it's not that we're practicing focusing on the breath to achieve a goal, because then we're setting a future goal that our attention is moving towards. Whereas really we're using the focusing of the breath just to bring the present moment awareness, or even just to bring a stillness to the mind for that period of time. And it takes work. There's no question about it. It takes
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a study, and I just wanted to be sure. Was that also the one you referred to just before we started? You have a new study that's just come out. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, sure. It's Tony. We have a paper. Well, it's an article actually. It's a review article, and it's looking at the application of functional breathing towards obstructive sleep apnea. And I wrote it in conjunction with an ear, nose, and throat doctor, Dr. Carlos O'Connor, and a medical doctor, PhD, Dr. Plaza. And we submitted it for peer review, and it's been accepted. It was published yesterday or the day before. Yeah, yesterday, in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. And it's a good journal with a high impact factor. It's the first time that I'm aware of that we looked at the application of functional breathing for sleep apnea, not just nose breathing. not just the biochemistry, but looking at nasal breathing, biochemistry, biomechanics, and resonance frequency breathing. And if we look at obstructive sleep apnea, in terms of the male population, it affects 26% of males aged between 30 and 50 years of age. And males aged from 50 to 70, it's 43%. So almost 1 in 2 men over 50 years of age. And for females, it's about 9% of females up to the age of 50. But postmenopausal, it increases 300%. So for females, it can be very related then, say, for increased sympathetic drive, hot flashes, disrupted sleep, insomnia comes in there. And the other thing then is in terms of mental health, when insomnia and obstructive sleep apnea come together, depression is more common. So then we have to think of people with mental health issues such as depression. And these people are exhausted. And what's causing what? Is it the insomnia and obstructive sleep apnea, which is resulting in exhaustion causing depression? Or is it depression, which in turn is feeding back into exhaustion? And there's always a bidirectional relationship that needs a little bit digging. So that article that was published is a great start. I think it is, and hopefully it'll generate a little bit of a debate, because this has been talked about in children for 100 years, but I've accounts of where the importance of nasal breathing during sleep has been discussed for 400 years ago. 400 years ago. And, I made sure my mouth is closed absolutely every single night. And that's one thing that goes without question. And the difference that it makes in terms of that performance and focus and concentration, and even just dental health. You think of the individual who is a singer and they're asleep at night and all that trauma, sucking the moisture out of the airways, drying out the airways, cooling the airways. And it really is trauma to the upper airways. And it's so important that singers really look after the upper airways, and not just the upper airways, the lower airways as well, because it's all linked. If there's an issue with the lungs, it will travel up to the nose. And if there's an issue with the nose, it can travel down to the lungs. The diaphragm is connected with the emotions, and the diaphragm is also connected with the upper airway dilator muscles in the throat. So, there's just that's the interesting thing about the breath, that it's simple and it's complex at the same time.
I heard you say something that I thought was a little golden nugget, um, to help people remember. We're kind of conditioned to take a big breath for singing or take a big breath for yoga or whatever. And you said the term antioxidants. We take antioxidants to try to decrease the oxygen. Am I saying this right? Is this true? Something I heard that you say on a podcast, and I thought, well, I never thought of it in that term, in that
Yeah, so there's free radicals which are conducive to causing ill health. And, we have to ask the question that if you're really breathing hard and fast, is it increasing oxidative stress? And it has been shown that using breath holding and also diaphragmatic breathing can help to reduce oxidative stress. I think really, Tony, it's a realization that, with air, as human beings, we survive on food, water, air, and we live without food for weeks. We can live without water for days, and we can live without air for just a few minutes. And when I used to start, I can remember talking with the groups of people going back 15 years ago, and they'd say, you're telling me the wrong thing. People have been always saying to me to breathe more air, and you're coming along and saying breathe less air. And it's just that we want people to breathe less air for short periods of time to get that adaptation towards slower breathing. So the individual who's breathing fast in front of me, I will typically have them breathe less air, slower breathing. And I'll work on their biochemistry first, their biomechanics, and then in resonance frequency for short periods of time to change their pattern of breathing. And then, if somebody is doubting me, I'll say, well, you've often taken big breaths or deep breaths. And they'll say, yeah, because everybody has done it. I say, how does it make you feel? If I said to you, take 10 big breaths in and out of your mouth, how are you going to feel as a result of that? And more often than not, they'll say that they feel lightheaded. And then you're saying, well, what's happening there? You've breathed more air into your lungs. but has it resulted in more or less oxygen reaching the brain? And the problem with breathing those 10 big breaths, or even 2 big breaths or 3 big breaths, isn't that, number one, it doesn't add more oxygen to the blood, but what it does is it gets rid of more carbon dioxide. It gets rid of too much carbon dioxide, and it's the loss of carbon dioxide that causes the blood vessels to constrict and less oxygen to be delivered.
Mhm.
Well,
So
you have, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we want to give him time. We're going to have to let him go because you and I could talk his ear off all day. But I was going to let him tell us the title of the book, where to get it, all of that. But I'll let you ask
Yeah.
your question first.
Yes. So I was going to say, I have one question before we talk about your new book, and that is, so the average female, how many breaths per minute is a good amount?
So typically we'd be looking, 10 to 14 breaths per minute. But Denise, the only thing is it's just focusing on the respiratory rate may not be enough. We have to look at
Sure.
the respiratory rate with the tidal volume. And I suppose if I was to say, if somebody said to me, well, what should I be looking for? Well, I'd say, look down at your breathing and ask yourself, do you see, is your breathing a little bit high or are you breathing low? So typically we want to get 20% movement from the upper chest, 80% movement from the diaphragm. Are you breathing fast or are you breathing slow? So do you have a respiratory rate above 16 breaths per minute? It's too fast during rest. Even we're trying to get that 14 breaths, 10 to 14 breaths per minute. Do you have a natural pause after exhalation? So as soon as you exhale, is there a natural cessation of the breath before you feel the need to breathe in again? That's a very good sign. And that happens only when the Bolt score is 20 seconds, in around 17 to 20 seconds plus. Do you have regular breathing patterns? That's very important because people with anxiety and panic disorder, they often have irregular breathing patterns, which causes fluctuations in blood gases. And this feeds into anxiety. So, I suppose a very simple screening tool is the Bolt score, because when you have a low Bolt score, you typically have a faster respiratory rate. You're typically more likely to breathe upper chest, more likely to have irregular breathing, more likely that you don't have that natural pause. If your Bolt score is low, you don't have a natural pause following exhalation. I think it's really some awareness of the breath, and breathing should be effortless during rest. And anytime people feel that there's an effort to their breathing, something is going on. And, in terms of the practice of it, to bear in mind that it's not just about developing the biomechanics. All too often I feel that many people go to a studio and they're taught how to breathe deep. And in the process, they're taking these full big breaths, which in turn then is sacrificing the biochemistry. So I think we have to think of this three-legged stool, and that you have the biochemical aspect, the biochemical leg, the biomechanical leg, and resonance frequency. And we need all three legs to support them. But normally when I'm working with somebody from a functional breathing point of view, I focus on one leg first. Because if I try and change their breathing patterns from a biochemical, if I try and do it from all three, it messes everything up. And yeah, and it's not complicated. I know people might say, oh my God, there's so much information to it. No, there is some depth to it. There's no doubt. But I'd always say to people, listen, just start off with one. Start off with one thing. And if that's just learning how to decongest your nose by holding your breath, start off with that. Switch to nasal breathing. The more you breathe through your nose, the better your nose works. If you get stressed and your mind is racing, what can you do? Small breath holds for recovery. If, for example, you have a respiratory condition that you're low blood oxygen saturation, what can you do? Slow, low breathing to improve alveolar ventilation. So, for females as well, as we spoke about tracking Bolt score and things like that. And yeah, it's tailoring the exercises to suit the individual as well.
Yeah, great. That's good. I just wondered because it's one of the things that I track is my respiratory, you know, how many times per minute I take a breath. And so my respiratory rate, I track it. And I just wondered if I was in the ballpark or not. I am. Yay,
Yeah,
me.
it's a good thing to do. I
I
know I
feel so
gave you a
much better.
terrible
I was
long
feeling
explanation
anxiety
there,
about
but
it.
no,
No, it's
no,
good.
no, no,
All right. So
no.
tell us about
It's
your
an
new book.
it's an important one.
Thank
So
you.
the new book is called The Breathing Cure, and it'll be out within Europe and available online from the 8th of February. So we put it out at pre-order at the moment. I'm excited about this because I think it's opening up the application of breathing beyond what we've already looked upon. I didn't really look at type 1 diabetes, but the research is showing that we can improve it. We can reduce the need for insulin and improve diabetes control in this group. Epilepsy, we can, and this is by chance because, one girl, her name is Jenny Snook, and I got an email out of the blue, and I put her name public because she's put her story public with the Epileptic Society here in Ireland, and I've included her in the book. And she was many years, decades having seizures, continuous seizures on best of medication. And she started getting her mouth closed at night, and her seizures started dropping. As simple as
Wow.
that. It's often
Wow.
too simple. And this has been talked about since 1924. The brain, by regulating breathing, regulates its own excitability. And Dr. Robert Fright, who was a very prominent researcher in New York, I think, he wrote a book called Hyperventilation Syndrome. He wrote a book called Breathe Well, Be Well. He spoke about all of this 20 years ago. And yet you have people with epilepsy not being aware of it. People with migraine, we brought that in. Osteoporosis. Women's health, there's a huge, fairly significant section on that as well. Both for young women and postmenopausal. Sleep apnea, snoring and insomnia, children's development, functional breathing and functional movement. People who, especially with athletes, really developing the core, but not necessarily taking into consideration the influence of breathing patterns and functional. So that's what the book is. It's a big one. It's 190,000 words. So to put that into context, it's 536 pages, but not for that to put people off. I had to include the science because otherwise,
Absolutely.
I think it's really
Absolutely.
important,
Yeah, no, for somebody like me, I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna need to see some science on that.
Yeah, no,
So
don't worry. Plenty, just plenty. Now, I put in a chapter as well on sex, and this was just a little bit off topic, but I says we might as
now
well
my
include it
husband's gonna
because,
read it.
well, tell him if he's a
Selling
mouth
point for
breather.
everybody.
Now he's gonna read it. I couldn't get him to read your first one, but when I tell him sex is in the second one, he'll be like, "Give it to me."
That's funny.
Yeah, there's a section in there for men, and I just one word of advice to any of the male listeners: don't be a mouth breather in sleep. That's one thing, because it doesn't help downstairs. Put it that way.
That's funny.
Yep.
Well, I
Yep.
can't
Yep.
wait
Yep.
to read the book. You can count on us. We'll be spreading the word.
Great, Tony. Thanks
Absolutely.
very much.
Absolutely.
And it's great to reach out to an audience because I think there's a great connection between breathing and singing.
Oh,
Really
absolutely.
wonderful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Thank
it's
you.
great.
Well, thank you
Thank
very,
you,
very
Patrick,
much.
for your time, and we wish you the best luck with this new book. I don't think you need luck. I think it'll be fine. Your audience that read and devoured the first book is going to be thrilled to get their hands on a second book. And like I said, we do our best to spread the word about your work and your research and all the things that you do. So if someone wants to, let's say somebody wants to get certified in Oxygen Advantage. I know at least one person of the two of us that would like that, maybe both of us. But anyway, how would you do that during COVID?
Oh, we do it online. So yeah, because it's obviously no travel at the moment, so everything is online. So I do the classes online. For example, we're currently doing a training, and it starts in 2 hours or 1 hour's time, 4 p.m. London time, and it goes from 4 p.m. London time to 6 p.m. London time. We do 7 sessions online, but then people can return back to whatever sessions they need. So we have it all online, both live training and also everything is recorded as well. So there's a manual as well. The manuals are fairly just in terms of, the instructor
Wow.
training manual and things like that. So the support is there. So it's working pretty good. Yeah.
And he literally
Okay.
does have people trained around the globe. I mean, if you look on your website, you can see all the instructors because we have worked with Bob Solier. He's also been one
Oh,
of
yes.
he's on one of your so
He's a
Yeah.
great guy.
Great guy.
Yeah.
He is a great
he's
guy.
a
Yeah.
Yes.
great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's funny. It's a small world. I just had an email from him there about 20 minutes ago, just before we started. So he's very much into HRV as well and putting it into practice,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that's great. Yeah, do
All
you know
right.
what?
Well,
Just drop
thank
me an
you.
email as well. If just drop me an email in terms of, and if you want a copy of the PDF of the book, drop me an email and I'll send it on to you. So at least you'll get a sneak preview of what's in it.
That'd be
Let me
great.
think. Of
Awesome.
course. We'd love
Okay,
that. We'd love
do
Yeah.
that.
that.
Yeah.
Thank,
We'll reach out.
thank you.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
yeah, I'm just, kind of geeking out here. So I'm not normally short on words, but today I kind of am. So
So thank you.
thank you.
Great
Yes.
stuff.
Thank you so
Listen,
much.
lovely conversation. Thanks very much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And Tony and
Thank you.
Denise, chat to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We are very grateful that you joined us today.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe, write a review, share it with a friend.